The city was alive with its usual chaos. Cars honked, people shouted, and the smell of street food mixed with the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. Among all this, an old man moved slowly along the sidewalk. His coat was worn and patched in several places, and a small, weathered bag hung from his shoulder. He didn't rush like everyone else. His steps were careful, deliberate, as though he carried the weight of the world in his bones. At the corner of the busy square, there was a piano. It was not fancy, just a simple upright piano painted in faded black, placed there for anyone to play. Most people passed it without a second glance. Some stopped for a moment, tapping a finger on a key, but soon moved on. Today, however, something different was about to happen. The old man approached the piano and stopped. He looked around at the busy street. People were walking in every direction, talking on phones, carrying bags, hurrying to appointments. Some glanced at him briefly and then returned to their routines. He lowered himself onto the bench and let out a small sigh. His fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating for just a moment as if listening to the city itself before he began. When the first notes came out, they were soft, delicate, almost timid. At first, people barely noticed. A child paused mid-step, curious about the sound. A man carrying groceries turned his head, confused for a moment, then smiled faintly. The old man's hands moved with a slow, careful rhythm, each key pressed with intention. It wasn't just music. It was something more, something that seemed to reach inside people as they walked by. The notes were simple at first, but there was a strange beauty in them. The music didn't demand attention, but it invited it. A few more people stopped. A woman holding a coffee cup leaned against a wall, listening quietly. A teenager on a skateboard slowed down just enough to watch. Even the birds in the square seemed to pause, fluttering closer to the sound. The old man closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't look at the people who had gathered. He didn't need to. The music flowed from him naturally, like it had been waiting inside him for a long time. Each note carried a memory, a feeling, a story. The city noise faded slightly around those who listened, as if the music created its own space in the middle of the chaos. A vendor selling pretzels stopped mid-sentence watching the man play. He wiped his hands on his apron and leaned against the cart. Even a dog, tied to a nearby post, lifted its head and tilted it curiously. The old man didn't rush. He didn't perform for applause. He played because he had to, because the music inside him demanded release. People began to notice the small details. The way his fingers moved, precise yet soft. The way his shoulders relaxed into the music, as if each note was a conversation with the world. A young woman, passing by with a stroller, slowed to a walk, mesmerized. She held her baby gently, letting the soft melody fill the space around them. Even the busy office workers in the nearby buildings glanced out of their windows, their eyes drawn to the square. Time seemed to stretch. What had started as a few soft notes became a gentle wave, moving through the square. People stopped checking their phones. Conversations quieted. Even the city itself seemed to lean in and listen. The music had a strange effect, slowing hearts, softening faces, making strangers feel a connection without a word. The old man's eyes were still closed. He didn't play for recognition or for coins, dropped into a small cup by the piano's side. He played because the music was a part of him, because it was a language older than words, older than the city, older than the rush of everyday life. Each note carried a fragment of his life, of joys and sorrows, of memories long tucked away. A few children had gathered near the edge of the square. They whispered to each other, fascinated. One little boy reached out to press a key softly, but the old man gently guided his hand back. There was patience in his touch, a quiet teaching without words. The music continued, not hurried, not forced. The city was still moving around them, but in the square, there was a different rhythm now, a slower, gentler one. The old man's music began to change subtly. The notes grew a little stronger, more confident, as if he was telling a story now. There was a hint of sadness, a memory of someone long gone, but also a sense of hope that threaded through every chord. People who had only stopped out of curiosity were now rooted in place, caught in the invisible web of his music. An elderly woman sitting on a bench smiled softly, tears brimming in her eyes. She clutched a small photograph in her hands, staring down at it as the music spoke to her in ways words could not. A group of teenagers leaned against a wall, their usual chatter replaced by quiet awe. Even the street itself seemed to breathe differently, each car passing by a little more slowly, each footstep a little lighter. Some people tried to capture the moment on their phones, but many put their devices away, realizing that this could not be fully experienced through a screen. The music demanded presence, demanded feeling, demanded that people truly listen. The old man didn't glance at the crowd. He didn't need to. The connection was silent, powerful, undeniable. A busker playing nearby packed up his guitar quietly, sensing that the square had changed. His usual audience had shifted, drawn into the old man's world for a little while. The smell of pretzels, the honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, it all faded into the background. Here, in this moment, the music was the center of everything. The old man's hands continued to dance over the keys. Every so often, he would pause for just a breath, and the silence would feel heavy with meaning. Then the melody would rise again, stronger, filling the spaces the city had ignored. People began to sway slightly, caught up in the rhythm, even without realizing it. A man in a business suit tapped his foot, smiling, forgetting the meeting he was late for. A gentle breeze moved through the square, carrying the music with it. A paper bag rustled, a bird took flight, and the city seemed to listen along. People's faces softened, strangers looked at each other and smiled. Small gestures of connection sparked by something as simple as a song on a street piano. Time passed, but it felt different. The old man's music didn't follow the usual rules of clocks and schedules. It existed outside them, in a space where emotion and sound were the only measures. And as people continued to gather, drawn by the haunting beauty of the melody, it became clear that this was not just a performance. It was a gift. The old man finally opened his eyes, glancing briefly at the growing crowd. There were no loud cheers, no rush of applause, just quiet, attentive faces looking back at him. He nodded slightly, acknowledging their presence without breaking the spell. And then he continued to play, letting the notes carry on, filling the square, weaving a story that only music could tell, a story that would linger long after the last note faded into the city noise. As the soft notes continued to float through the square, the old man's music began to grow richer, deeper, filled with feeling that seemed to echo beyond the walls of the nearby buildings. His eyes were still closed, but every movement of his hands told a story of years lived, of memories tucked away in corners of his mind. People had stopped moving, drawn in by the unexpected beauty that had broken through the city's usual noise. A few more passers-by began to slow down. Some walked in a daze, their minds carried away by the melody. A young woman paused by a lamppost, holding her bag tightly, listening as though she had found a secret in the notes. A man in a business suit, briefcase in hand, leaned against a wall, closing his eyes and letting the music wash over him. Even a group of teenagers on the corner, who had been laughing and joking a moment before, became quiet, their attention captured by something they could not explain. The old man's fingers moved with increasing confidence, each chord stronger than the last, yet still gentle. There was a rhythm in the city now, one that mirrored the pulse of the music. The street vendors lowered their voices, conversations faded, and the hum of traffic seemed softer. The melody had a way of slowing time, making the busy world pause and take notice. A little girl, holding her mother's hand, stepped closer to the piano. She had wide eyes and a small, uncertain smile, as if she were witnessing magic. The old man glanced at her briefly, a small smile forming beneath his mustache, and returned to the keys. The music spoke to her in a way words never could. Her mother watched silently, sensing the moment was rare and fragile, knowing that this was something the child would remember for years to come. People started to gather in a loose circle around the piano. They did not speak, but there was a shared understanding in their silence. Everyone present felt that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that had no need for explanation. A few tried to record it on their phones, but many put them away, realizing the magic of the moment could not be fully captured on a screen. The melody shifted now, becoming more playful, light, as if the old man were recalling a moment from long ago. There were pauses between the notes that made the heart swell and then settle. The music was alive, breathing, telling stories without the need for words. People felt emotions they had not felt in a long time: joy, longing, nostalgia, and a strange sense of peace. An elderly man sitting on a nearby bench listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He wiped a tear from his eye and smiled softly, remembering a song he had once played with his own family. The old man at the piano seemed to be reaching into the hearts of everyone present, touching memories, hopes, and dreams that had been buried under the routines of life. There was no judgment in the music, only a gentle, universal invitation to feel. A young man, who had been running late to a meeting, stopped mid-stride. He glanced at his watch and sighed, but something in him refused to move on. He stood there, frozen for a few moments, letting the music wrap around him. In that short time, the worries of the day, the endless deadlines, and the pressures of work seemed to melt away, replaced by a calm he hadn't realized he needed. The old man's performance grew more intricate. His fingers danced over the keys with precision, yet there was a softness in every touch. The music seemed to weave together the sounds of the city itself, the distant hum of a bus, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the murmur of voices. It was as if the square had become a living instrument, with the old man conducting its every note. People began to move in small, unconscious ways, tapping their feet, swaying slightly, following the invisible rhythm. Children, who had been wandering nearby, now gathered closer, sitting on the ground, captivated. Their laughter had faded, replaced by wide-eyed wonder. The old man's hands never paused, but he seemed to play for them as much as for the adults. He understood that music had a power to reach everyone, regardless of age, background, or circumstance. A couple walking their dog stopped mid-step. They held each other's hands, and the dog sat quietly, sensing the stillness of the moment. The couple exchanged a glance, silently acknowledging that this was more than just a street performance. It was a shared experience, a fleeting moment of connection in a world that often felt disconnected. The melody took on a new tone, richer and deeper, almost melancholic. It carried a sense of longing, a story of loss and hope intertwined. People in the circle seemed to lean in, drawn to the emotion behind each note. A young woman hugged herself tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks, feeling the music speak to her in ways she could not explain. Even those who had been skeptical at first could not resist the pull of the melody. The old man's eyes opened briefly, scanning the crowd. There were no applause, no cheers, just attentive faces, people fully present in the moment. He nodded slightly to himself and returned to the keys. The music continued, flowing like a river through the square, touching each person in a unique, personal way. There was no rush, no end in sight, only the present, pure and unbroken. A young boy in the crowd whispered to his sister, asking if the man had been a professional musician. She shrugged, unable to answer. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling, the magic of hearing someone pour their soul into music in such a simple, ordinary place. The old man didn't need a stage, a concert hall, or an audience of thousands. Here, on a busy street corner, he had everyone's attention, if only for a moment. The city around the square continued its work, but in the circle of the old man's music, time slowed. A man walking to his car stopped and leaned against it, letting the music fill the air around him. A group of teenagers exchanged smiles, their earlier squabbles forgotten. The melody seemed to remind them of something deeper, something that mattered more than the everyday noise of life. As the music grew, so did the crowd. People who had passed by earlier returned, drawn by the sound they couldn't forget. Even those in nearby cafes and shops stepped outside to listen. There were no demands, no signs, no announcements, just the power of music reaching out to touch every heart. The old man remained focused, his eyes closed, as though he were in conversation with the piano, with the city, and with everyone gathered. The notes became more expressive, each one telling a story of experience and emotion. There was a gentle sadness, a whisper of joy, a thread of hope winding through every chord. People felt the weight of the music in their chests, a quiet resonance that lingered long after each note faded. Strangers who had never met exchanged nods and smiles, connected by a shared understanding that transcended words. A woman carrying groceries stopped at the edge of the crowd, leaning on a railing, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The music had a way of drawing out thoughts and feelings that had been buried under the busyness of life. She closed her eyes and listened, feeling a sense of calm she had not felt in months. The old man's hands never faltered, never paused, but the emotions carried in each note were as powerful as if he were speaking directly to each listener. The melody shifted again, playful and light, like a gentle reminder of simpler times. Children giggled quietly, moving closer to the piano, fascinated by the sound. Adults smiled, remembering days when life felt less complicated, when music was a companion to everyday moments. The old man played with a quiet joy, his eyes twinkling as if he knew the magic he was creating, even if he did not seek recognition. The city seemed to hold its breath, the usual noises fading into the background. A few birds perched nearby, their heads cocked, listening. Even the wind seemed to soften, carrying the notes further down the street. People who had been rushing to appointments or meetings found themselves lingering, unwilling to leave the spell the old man had cast. It was more than just music. It was a moment of connection, a reminder of the beauty that could exist in the ordinary. As the song drew on, the music became more complex, more layered. Each chord seemed to carry a story, a fragment of the old man's life, shared silently with everyone around. The crowd felt it intuitively, understanding that this was a rare gift, a performance not for fame or money, but for the simple, profound act of sharing beauty. The square had transformed from a place of noise and haste into a sanctuary of sound and emotion. People moved closer, some standing on tiptoe to see the piano keys, others simply letting the music wash over them. There was no pushing, no shoving, only a collective sense of respect and awe. Even the street vendors paused in their work, listening as the old man's hands danced across the keys. The melody wrapped around each person individually, yet it created a shared experience, connecting strangers in a way few things could. And still, the old man played, his music flowing endlessly, unbroken. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The melody spoke of life's joys and sorrows, of memories cherished and lost, of hope and resilience. People felt as though they were hearing the story of the world, told not with words, but through the power of sound. And in that moment, the city stopped, not in stillness, but in quiet appreciation of something far greater than themselves. The music continued to flow, carrying a story that had no words, only feeling. People who had wandered into the square by chance now found themselves rooted in place. The melody had a way of wrapping around each listener, speaking directly to the heart. It was not loud or dramatic, yet it filled every corner of the street, reaching into the smallest spaces, touching every soul that had paused to listen. The old man's hands moved with a life of their own. His fingers pressed each key with care, coaxing out tones that seemed to carry the weight of his life experience. Each note held a memory, a fragment of joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. People felt it as if they were listening to the story of someone they knew deeply but had never met. They could sense the years behind each chord, the moments of happiness and pain, all woven into a melody that required no explanation. The crowd had grown into a loose circle around the piano. Some stood, some sat on the edges of benches, while a few children crouched on the ground, their eyes wide with wonder. Everyone seemed to instinctively understand that this was not just music. It was a rare gift, a window into someone's soul, shared with anyone willing to stop and listen. There was a quiet reverence in the air, a collective acknowledgement of the magic being created in front of them. A woman carrying a bundle of groceries leaned against a lamppost, her eyes closed, feeling the music move through her. She had been thinking about bills and errands, deadlines and duties, but the melody pulled her away from all of that, reminding her of the simple beauty that could exist in a busy day. She took a deep breath, letting the sounds wash over her, letting herself exist only in that moment. Around her, others were doing the same, surrendering to the power of the music. The old man did not speak, did not ask for attention, did not seek applause. He simply played. Each chord was a conversation, each pause a reflection. The people in the square felt connected, not just to the music, but to each other. Strangers exchanged smiles, nods, or a quiet glance that said, without words, "I understand. I feel it too." There was a sense of community, born entirely from the old man's performance, as if the music had built invisible bridges between everyone present. A young man who had been rushing through the square stopped abruptly. He glanced at his watch and frowned at the time he had lost, but he could not move. He was held by the gentle insistence of the music, by the emotion woven into each note. It spoke to him of things he had forgotten to notice in the rush of life, of moments of quiet beauty he had ignored in the past. He exhaled slowly, feeling lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The old man's hands never faltered. He played with precision, but there was a softness to every touch, a human warmth that could not be replicated. The melody was growing, winding through minor notes and then rising into gentle highs, carrying listeners along with it. Each change in the music seemed to evoke new emotions, drawing people deeper into the experience. A couple walking their dogs stopped, holding hands, feeling the tension of the day dissolve as they let the melody surround them. A child reached tentatively toward the piano, curious and fascinated. The old man noticed and gave a small, understanding nod, acknowledging the child's presence without breaking the rhythm of the song. There was a kind of quiet mentorship in that gesture, a gentle recognition that music could be passed along, felt, and shared without words or instruction. The child's eyes sparkled, and she smiled, realizing that she had discovered something extraordinary. Nearby, an elderly woman sat on a bench, clutching a photograph in her hands. She let the music speak to her, filling spaces she had not touched in years. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she smiled through them, understanding that the music was telling a story of life itself, of love, loss, hope, and resilience. Around her, people who had never known each other felt a strange connection, bound together by the shared experience of being fully present. The city carried on around them, yet the square felt separate, almost suspended in time. Cars slowed, their drivers distracted by the music. Pedestrians paused mid-step, caught in the gentle web of sound. Even the street vendors lowered their voices, sensing that something unique was happening. The old man's performance had become a quiet revolution, a disruption not of chaos but of attention, drawing the city to a pause where people could simply exist in beauty and emotion. The melody shifted, becoming playful, almost mischievous. The notes bounced lightly, like a child skipping through a garden. People smiled, laughed quietly to themselves, feeling joy that had been buried under routines and worries. Children clapped softly, adults tapped feet, and even the pigeons that had been pecking at crumbs on the ground seemed to pause and watch, caught up in the unexpected charm of the music. The old man's eyes twinkled slightly, as if he were sharing a private joke with the world, letting the city glimpse his joy. A man carrying a briefcase glanced toward the piano, torn between leaving and staying. He hesitated, then decided to lean against a nearby post, surrendering to the moment. The music seemed to reach inside him, recalling memories he had forgotten, and for a few precious minutes, he let go of schedules and obligations. He was not alone. Around him, strangers shared the same surrender, each lost in the melody, yet somehow united by it. The old man's music grew more intricate again, layers of emotion intertwined with technical skill. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was not a performance for show, but a conversation with the world, a dialogue with anyone willing to listen. People felt the story within the music, experiencing moments of laughter, sadness, reflection, and hope. It was as if the square had been transformed into a space where all of life's feelings could exist freely. A young woman holding a baby watched the old man, mesmerized. She held her child close, letting the soft music become a lullaby, a gentle thread connecting them to a larger world. Other parents nearby adjusted their strollers, quieting their children, allowing the sound to fill the space with calm. The music was teaching patience, presence, and the beauty of noticing something extraordinary in an ordinary day. A street artist packing his materials stopped, leaning on his shoulder bag. He watched silently, understanding that this moment could not be recreated or replicated. The old man's fingers flew across the keys with a fluidity that was mesmerizing. Yet every movement felt personal and human. There was a depth of emotion in the music that transcended skill, reaching directly to the hearts of those who had gathered. People felt a quiet gratitude, a sense of witnessing something rare and fragile. The melody softened, bringing a gentle calm over the crowd. People exhaled together, almost unconsciously, feeling a shared release of tension and worry. Some closed their eyes, swaying slightly. Others leaned against nearby posts or benches, allowing themselves to be carried by the sound. The old man's music created a space where the ordinary concerns of life were temporarily suspended, replaced by something deeper and more human. A young boy whispered to his sister about the old man's fingers, how they seemed to dance across the keys effortlessly. The sister nodded, her eyes wide with awe. They were learning, without words, that beauty could be found in unexpected places, that kindness and artistry could change the mood of a whole street. Around them, others were experiencing similar realizations, small personal awakenings in the midst of a busy city. The music continued, each note a thread connecting the present moment to the past and future. People felt their hearts open in ways they had not anticipated, their emotions stirred by something pure and unforced. The old man's performance was not about fame, money, or recognition. It was about sharing, about creating a space where anyone could feel alive, even for a brief time. The city had stopped, not in protest, but in awe, and everyone who had paused felt that they were part of something larger than themselves. As the performance went on, the old man's hands seemed to move with more freedom, more joy. The melody carried laughter and sorrow, memories and dreams, hope and reflection. Strangers exchanged glances, smiles, and nods, each silently acknowledging the shared experience. Children clapped softly, adults tapped feet, and the city seemed to bend slightly around the music, allowing a rare moment of unity and beauty to exist. The square had become a living space of emotion, a temporary sanctuary where life's ordinary noises faded into the background. People were fully present, not thinking about deadlines, appointments, or errands. They were listening, feeling, breathing in a shared moment that could not be bought or planned. The old man's music had created a community, a fleeting but profound connection that touched everyone who had stopped to witness it. And through it all, the old man played on, eyes closed, hands moving effortlessly, as if the music itself guided him. Every chord was deliberate, every pause filled with meaning. The square was alive with the invisible threads of emotion and attention, all connected by the power of his music. People felt it, breathed it, lived it, knowing that this rare gift was being shared with them, and them alone, in the middle of an ordinary day that had suddenly become extraordinary. The music shifted once more, this time carrying a depth of feeling that made people stop breathing for a moment. The old man's hands moved with incredible precision, yet there was a softness, a tenderness, in each note. The square had grown quiet, the city fading into the background as if it had been put on pause. Every person there was listening, hearts open, feeling the emotions that words could never capture. A woman sitting on a bench clutched a small book to her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks. She was alone, yet she felt a strange sense of company, a connection to everyone gathered around. The music seemed to speak to her memories, to moments long gone but never forgotten. She exhaled slowly, feeling a warmth spread through her, as if the old man's melody was telling her that everything would be all right. Children were sitting cross-legged on the ground, captivated by the fluidity of his hands over the keys. Their parents stood nearby, watching silently, amazed at how the music seemed to reach across generations. Even the youngest ones, who could barely understand the concept of a song, sensed its magic, feeling the rhythm in their small chests, their tiny hearts responding to something greater than themselves. A couple walking slowly through the square stopped mid-step. They had been arguing quietly, tension written across their faces, but the music softened their hearts. They held hands instinctively, letting the melody guide them back to each other. A shared smile passed between them, unspoken words replaced by the sound that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. For a moment, the city's worries were forgotten. The old man's eyes remained closed, but he could sense the change in the crowd. He played not for recognition, but to reach the hearts of those who needed it most. Each chord carried a fragment of his life, each pause a reflection on the moments that had shaped him. The melody told stories of love, of loss, of hope, of resilience. People felt it deeply, some silently crying, others smiling, all connected by the invisible thread of his music. A young man leaned against a railing, his briefcase forgotten at his side. He had been rushing to a meeting, caught up in deadlines and pressures, but now he stood still, letting the music guide his thoughts. He felt lighter, almost as if he had been carrying a burden he hadn't noticed until this moment. The old man's performance had become a mirror, reflecting emotions that had been suppressed, allowing them to surface gently, safely. The square was alive with quiet awe. People moved subtly with the rhythm, swaying, tapping feet, or simply standing, absorbed. Conversations had vanished, replaced by the shared understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music had a way of reaching into the soul, bypassing thoughts and logic, touching something raw, unspoken. It was intimate yet universal, personal yet shared. A group of teenagers who had been skeptical at first now sat on the steps of a nearby building, listening with rapt attention. They whispered quietly to each other, pointing out the way the old man's fingers danced, the soft pauses, the rise and fall of the melody. They could feel the story behind it, though they didn't know its details. The music had taught them patience, focus, and the power of simply being present. A man with a camera hung around his neck stopped, lowering it. He had been recording the scene, thinking he would capture it for later, but he realized no lens could truly capture the moment. The music had to be felt, experienced directly. He put the camera away, closing his eyes for a few beats, letting the sound wash over him, understanding in a way that a photograph could never convey. Even the street vendors had paused, leaning on their carts, listening quietly. The smell of baked goods and roasted coffee lingered in the air, but it was softened, secondary to the music that dominated the square. People had come together without planning or instruction, drawn by something invisible yet undeniable. The old man's hands continued to move with grace, each note a gift, each pause a reminder that beauty could exist anywhere, even in the middle of a busy city street. A young woman with a stroller let her child feel the vibrations of the music through the wheels. She watched as the baby's tiny fingers tapped the handle, feeling the rhythm instinctively. Around her, other parents encouraged their children to engage with the music, sharing in a collective experience that had no agenda, no time limit, only presence. The old man's performance had transformed the square into a classroom of life, teaching lessons that went beyond words. The melody deepened, carrying a sense of longing. People felt their own memories rising to the surface, moments of joy and sadness intertwined. An elderly man sitting quietly on a bench wiped his eyes, thinking of days long gone, of friends and family he had loved. The music seemed to reach into the recesses of memory, brushing away dust and regret, leaving clarity and peace in its wake. Everyone present felt this, whether consciously or not. A young boy whispered to his sister about the shapes the old man's hands made on the keys. She nodded, her eyes wide, her imagination alive. They were learning the unspoken language of emotion, understanding the depth of feeling without a single word. Around them, children and adults alike were discovering the power of listening, the importance of stillness, and the beauty of sharing a moment with strangers through something as simple and profound as music. The square had become a sanctuary. The city continued its usual rhythm outside, but within this circle of people, time seemed suspended. Cars slowed, conversations dwindled, and even the wind seemed to carry the melody further down the street. The music was a bridge, connecting people who had never met, creating a shared sense of humanity. Every chord the old man struck seemed to weave them closer together, thread by thread. A woman sitting on the edge of a fountain let her fingers brush the water gently, feeling the vibrations of the music in the ripples. She closed her eyes, thinking of her own life, the paths she had taken, the decisions she had made. The old man's melody was a mirror, reflecting not only his experiences, but also the emotions and stories of everyone present. It was a subtle magic, quiet yet powerful, shaping hearts and minds in ways nothing else could. The old man's performance became more intricate. Layers of melody intertwined with moments of silence, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was not a show, but a conversation with the city, a dialogue with every person present. People felt the ebb and flow, the highs and lows, the gentle push and pull of life itself conveyed in sound. Some wiped tears, some smiled, some simply stood still, absorbing every vibration of the music. A young couple who had been sitting on the edge of the crowd leaned closer together, listening in silence. They didn't need to speak. The music said everything they needed to hear. It reminded them of why they had fallen in love, why they had stayed, and why they were still willing to face the world together. The old man's hands on the piano had created a space where the ordinary became extraordinary, where emotions long buried could surface safely and beautifully. The melody softened again, gentle and nurturing. People exhaled, relaxed, letting the music carry their worries away. Children giggled quietly, parents smiled, and even the birds seemed to pause, listening to the human story being told without words. The old man's eyes remained closed, yet he could feel the connection, the energy, the unspoken gratitude of the crowd. It was a communion, a rare and delicate thing, created simply by music and presence. The square felt alive with emotion. Strangers were connected by invisible threads, sharing a moment that would linger long after the last note faded. The old man continued to play, his hands moving with effortless grace, shaping the sound into a tapestry of life's joys, sorrows, hopes, and dreams. Each note was a brushstroke, each pause a space for reflection. People were transformed quietly, deeply, understanding that beauty and connection could exist in the simplest of acts. And still, the music carried on. The old man's performance had reached a point where it was no longer about him, or even about the piano. It was about the crowd, the city, the shared human experience. People felt alive, awake, present. They had discovered something in that moment that they would carry with them forever. A reminder that amidst the noise and rush of life, there were moments of extraordinary grace, moments that could touch the soul without a single word being spoken. The old man's music began to draw to a gentle close, the notes softening, lingering in the air like a memory that refused to fade. People had gathered all around the piano, standing, sitting, or crouching quietly, not wanting to break the fragile magic of the moment. The square had transformed into a sanctuary, a space where the usual rush of life had slowed, replaced by a sense of calm and shared presence. He played the final chords with care, letting each note hang in the air before slowly fading away. There was no rush, no urgency, only a deliberate, tender ending, as if he were leaving a piece of himself in the hearts of those who had listened. The crowd remained still, silent, as if afraid that any movement would shatter the spell that had been created. People were feeling something they couldn't quite name: grief, joy, hope, nostalgia. All at once, woven together by the music that had passed through them. A young woman, holding her baby close, whispered softly, her voice trembling, about how she had never felt so peaceful in the middle of a busy day. She looked around and noticed strangers smiling at each other, a quiet recognition in their eyes, and she realized that for a brief moment, they had all been connected, bound by something greater than themselves. The music had created a sense of community, a bond that required no words, only openness and presence. Children sat quietly, some leaning against their parents, some pressing their faces close to the piano, as if trying to capture the last vibrations in their tiny hands. The old man glanced at them with a small, gentle smile, knowing that the smallest listeners often understood the power of the music most clearly. They had learned something without even realizing it, that beauty could be found unexpectedly, and that it had the power to touch hearts and change moods without force or demand. An elderly man sitting nearby wiped a tear from his eye. He thought of his own past, of family and friends long gone, of moments he had cherished and moments he had lost. The music had carried him back, not painfully, but with warmth, letting him remember without grief, letting him feel the joy and sorrow simultaneously. He inhaled deeply, feeling lighter, grateful for the gift of having been present at such a rare moment. The couple who had been holding hands throughout the performance exchanged a quiet glance, their earlier tensions completely forgotten. They squeezed each other's hands, a silent agreement that this moment had changed them, reminded them why they had chosen to stay together through life's challenges. It was not dramatic or theatrical, but it was profound, and they carried the sensation in their hearts as they stood quietly, listening until the very last note dissolved into the soft sounds of the city around them. A young man with a briefcase slowly lowered it to the ground, finally allowing himself to breathe. He had been caught in the constant rush of life, but the music had stopped him, asked him to pause, to notice, to feel. For the first time in a long while, he felt fully present. The old man's melody had reminded him that life was not only about speed or tasks completed, but about connection, emotion, and the small moments of grace that could be found if one only stopped to see them. The street vendors leaned against their carts, silent, listening. Even the regular hustle of business felt softened, as if the music had tempered the noise and created a space of reflection. Coins and bags were forgotten for a moment, replaced by awareness and attention. Everyone in the square, even if briefly, shared in a rare human experience, one that was intangible yet unmistakable in its power. The old man rose slowly from the piano, his hands hovering over the keys for a final pause. There was a quiet acknowledgement, a silent communication with the crowd that he had shared everything he could in this performance. He did not look for applause, for recognition, or for gratitude. He simply stood, a figure of calm and grace, as the energy of the music remained in the air, a lingering presence that would stay with everyone long after he left. People remained for a moment, unsure if they should move, wanting to hold onto the magic just a little longer. A woman clutched the strap of her bag, looking around at the faces of strangers who had shared in this quiet miracle. Smiles were exchanged, nods given, unspoken acknowledgments of a shared experience that had touched them in ways ordinary words could not. The square had been transformed, the city momentarily paused, and in that space, everyone had felt a quiet, profound humanity. The old man took a few steps backward, giving a small nod to the gathered crowd. He began walking slowly, his coat brushing softly against the sidewalk, his small bag bouncing gently at his side. People watched him move away, feeling the weight of his presence and the gift he had given. Some clapped softly, but most remained silent, feeling that noise would break the delicate atmosphere that had been built by his music. They had been part of something sacred, and even in silence they knew it. Children waved shyly as he passed, and he gave them a faint smile, acknowledging them without words. Parents smiled in return, holding their little ones close, understanding that these small, fleeting interactions were part of a much larger moment, a memory that would be carried quietly in their hearts. The old man continued down the street, blending into the city once more, unassuming, carrying his music within him, leaving only its echo behind. A man who had been listening from a nearby cafe stood at the window, leaning out to catch the last glimpses of the old man disappearing into the crowd. He felt a strange emptiness mixed with gratitude, a sense that he had witnessed something rare, something that could not be repeated, only remembered. Others looked from windows, from doorways, from streets that branched off, catching small glimpses, all feeling the same mixture of awe and reflection. The city slowly began to reclaim its usual rhythm, but the echo of the music lingered. People carried it with them as they moved, a quiet companion in their minds and hearts. A woman walking home hummed a fragment of the melody under her breath, a reminder that beauty could be found anywhere. A young man returned to his office, feeling a lighter step, as if a small weight had been lifted. Children repeated the rhythms in their games, parents in their conversations, and strangers shared knowing smiles at the memory of a moment when time had paused. The old man had gone, yet the square remained different. There was a sense of peace, of shared humanity, that lingered in the air. People exchanged final glances, then slowly dispersed, carrying the quiet magic with them. Some lingered a little longer, looking back at the piano, perhaps imagining the next time someone would sit and fill it with life. They understood that the performance had been more than notes. It had been a gift, a bridge between souls in a city that often moved too fast to notice. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square, people began to move back to their routines, but their hearts were changed. They had witnessed something ordinary transformed into something extraordinary, something that would stay with them long after the city returned to its usual pace. The old man had played, and the world had paused, if only for a little while, to listen, to feel, and to remember the quiet power of human connection. And so the square, once bustling and chaotic, returned to normal life, but it carried the memory of the music. People told each other stories of the old man, of the melody that had stopped the city, of the feeling that lingered in their hearts. The piano remained, silent now, yet waiting for the next person to breathe life into it. The city moved on, but the memory of what had happened stayed alive, quietly reminding everyone who had been there that magic could exist in the most unexpected places, and that a single person, with nothing but a piano in their heart, could make the whole city stop just to listen.